Good evening. Today, we're going to be making our way up to the Highlands. We will be making our way down to Gleneagle Street. Actually, funny enough, where my surname is from. Scotland. And it is, of course, Calvin Harris. Let's get into it. Alright, let's listen from the top.
I feel it coming. Got your hand on my pulse. You know we got it, yeah. Are you gonna let it go? In your eyes I can see it's forever, but my heart is still beating the dark. In the deep of the night, when my mind is a minefield. Tell me right now. Will you still love me? Will you still love me? Yeah. Will you still hold me until the bitter end? When the hearts get low, the lights burn out. I think I know, but tell me now. Will you still love me? Will you still love me?
Alright, let's run through it. So, first thing, we are at 133 beats per minute. One thing I've noticed about Calvin Harris tunes is a lot of the time they're in A minor, so all of the white keys on the piano. This song is in E minor, so the only difference is that instead of the F, it's an F sharp. And it's something interesting to keep in mind because actually someone who's as big as Calvin Harris in a lot of his songs only ever uses the white keys of the piano. So it just shows you how good you can make music in just A minor or E minor in this case. So let's run through it. So first off in this intro, I've just cut up this splice guitar. And then underneath that, we have a very simple little Reese, which is following the bass notes. So here we can see what our chord progression is. So in E minor, we're starting on the C, we go into the E, to the D, to the C. And then the second half, we go down to the G and then up to the A. And one thing I've purposely left in are where I've cut this guitar sample up, there are some little clicks going on. You can hear there's those little pops. And so to get rid of them, we can just add these little faders here. So you no longer hear those pops. It's because when the signal goes from a 0 to 100, that's when you introduce the clicks. So having these little fades in means that you don't get that instant snap in volume, you get a little glide in. Hear those two there as well, so we just soften those up. Much better. And Calvin quite often has these rides on the intro. Just starting with the rhythm, very, very subtle in the background with a little bit of reverb on them.
I feel it coming. Got your hand on my pulse. You know we got it, yeah. Are you gonna let it go? In your eyes I can see it's forever, but my heart is still beating.
And And then we just introduce a clap. He always uses incredibly snappy sounds, so quite short, but with a really strong attack on them. So when you're choosing your samples in this kind of genre, this is exactly the kind of thing that Calvin uses. So we've added a Valhalla room with quite a big pre-delay on it. So without that reverb, it's quite flat. And then once we add that reverb with the pre-delay, and the reason we add the pre-delay is because it takes 91 milliseconds for that reverb to kick in. So if we had it low down like this, it still sounds pretty good, but you don't have the gap to allow the sample to breathe before you let the reverb in. So it's a nice way to add some reverb without it sort of clouding the original sample.
Eyes I can see us forever, but my heart is still beating the dark, in the deep and
And then we just add these chords. I'm sure you can hear where that has been influenced by. So these are the stock factory Pluck Alives. I use them all the time. If you know, you know, they're so good. So these are pretty much playing the triads. So we're playing our C here, and then we've got our fifth up here, and then we've got our third up here. So this is our basic triad here, and we've taken the third an octave up. And then just to create a little bit of difference in the melody, we've taken some of these notes down a little bit, just so there's a little bit of movement in that melody. And we followed pretty much the same formula for all of these. So we've got that triad, and then we've taken the second notes down a little bit, and then come back up to the triad, and then come back down to these second notes, just to make it a little bit interesting.
my heart is still beating the dark, in the deep of the night, when my mind is a minefield. Tell me right now, will you still love?
And quite often he uses really interesting, almost tambale sounding fills, very reverbed, and just sort of ways to introduce one section to the next. So we've got these two layers of fills that I've chopped up. And they've got a lot of reverb on them, and the reverb spills over into the next section. And that's very much what Calvin does a lot. Personally, I would tend to cut the reverbs going into the next section, but for this kind of style, it works really well, especially as we're going into this next section where it empties out quite a lot and there's not much going on. So having that spillover into an area where it's quite sparse really helps that transition much more.
I know. Will you still love me? Will you still love me?
So we're just introducing a kick here. And then we've got two layers of our bass. So our first layer is just a sub. So we've got this sub oscillator on here. And then we've got our envelope 2, which is affecting the filter cutoff. And then we've got some little bits of processing on here. And our chord progression moves now from the C to the E to the G to the A. And the length of these notes are quite important. So we've got these notes quite short, and then this third one especially feels like it really needs to be long. So this one and this one here, if they're not at this length, you don't get so much of a groove. And then when it's longer, feels much more skippy and has much more of a rhythm to it. And then on top of that, we've got this organ. I noticed in some of Calvin's songs, he uses a sort of vibe that is like an M1, but it isn't actually an M1. So I found this wavetable that works perfectly for it. So the pitch of this is actually 7 semitones up, even though we haven't done it here. The sample is already at 7 semitones. And then similar to the sub, we've got our envelope 1 affecting our cutoff. And then we've got a little bit of distortion, a little bit of chorus here and there. And one thing I always do with these kind of M1 sounds is put a redux on it. And it's very easy to overdo because it can be a really harsh, sharp kind of sound. But if you tickle it, so we've only got it at 25%, you can just help the highs burst out a little bit more. So without that, and with just like a really sharp little tinge on the top. So if we put that 100%, it's a little bit horrible, but you take it right the way down and just have a little bit of it. It really helps it to breathe a little bit of life in the top end. And then we've just got a little bit of reverb on that as well. And then with all of those basses and actually all of the synths in this song, I've got this groove at Notator 60B swing. So everything that's in MIDI here is following that groove. And one thing to note, because there's so few elements going on in this section, it's really important to fill it out somehow. And the way that I did that was with this Valhalla delay on the vocals. So you hear the vocal has got a lot of space in it. It's got a lot of reverb. So you hear this almost acting a little bit as a reverb. So it's really filling out that space. So again, we come in with a very similar feel. We've got a slightly different rhythm this time, but again, just a little feel, that kind of timbali, really reverbed feel, just to introduce that next section. And then we have a clap on the last beat before all those drums start to kick in, just so it introduces those drums before they all come in together. And very basic drums. The thing that Calvin does very well is, like I said earlier, has very snappy samples. And the thing that is really driving the rhythm are those toms. So that those are the things that are really driving the rhythm of this whole song. And then before we come into this instrumental section, we drop everything out. So we have our kick hitting on this last beat here, and then we have a few effects. So we've got an impact, and then we have some rises going into this next section. So these effects help us to transition from this vocal section into this instrumental section. So one thing to note again, that Calvin Harris is genuinely top tier. I've never heard someone do this so well. Is he uses different instruments to create rhythms. So as we can see here, our bass and our chords are doing slightly different rhythms. So if we listen to them together. And I feel like when you start out producing, it's very easy to feel like you have to follow the rhythm of the chords with your bass. And actually that can be quite static and can be quite boring. And this is a great example of someone who does this so well, is it feels like there are two musicians playing together and they're not playing the exact same rhythms over and over. So when you have two different rhythms playing with two different sections, it just gives so much more life to the whole of the track. And then one thing was an accident I actually did with these chords were these little notes at the top here. They almost sound like a basketball shoe skipping on a slippery floor a little bit, but it almost feels like there's just like little bits of ambience in there, and that was totally a mistake. And I just left them in because it did just add something to the sort of ambience of the whole tune. So although on paper it's not how you should sort of structure your chords, I mean, having these weird little bits here and there isn't necessarily something that I would do often, but it just, as I said, it was a mistake and it sort of just added something different that I thought was quite cool, so I left it in. So we come to these leads. Sort of guitar-y sound, so they are all Serum factory presets, guitar, acoustic. Mariachi guitar is the lead. And then I've got two behind that, so one hard panned left. Classic nylon, same in factory. And then our right side, same factory, guitar, and this one is up 1 octave. So we have a little bit of a sort of melodic bed behind that lead guitar. So it's not just one by itself. We have a little bit of a chorus with those three going on together. So that lead one by itself, and then all of those together really fills it out a lot. So especially for something like this where it's an intensely instrumental part and this is the lead actor in this whole sequence, it felt like it needed some backing, and adding a couple of layers, whether it's different sounds or different octaves, just helps to push it a little bit further. And in terms of the melody, if I'm honest, I just played it through on a piano. You know, I'm starting on the root note here, so we're doing a little bridge up into the root note, so we're starting on the E, and then honestly I just played what sounded best. But one thing that I can sort of retrospectively analyse is these F sharps. So that is the second in the scale of our key, and when I played those it felt really Calvin Harris-y. So really utilising this F sharp, so the second in the scale, was something that really lent itself to this kind of style. Almost has a sort of nostalgic feel to it when you go to those F sharps, because it's a little bit dissonant but it feels really nice. And what I've also done is I've changed the lead progression so it's not the same twice round. For the first half we go to the F to the G, second half we go from the A to the D, so it just changes it up a little bit. So you don't really want your melodies, especially when they're this prominent in a song, to be static, because if you had that same melody happening twice, it would get a little bit boring. So you just got to find ways of melodically changing it. In this instance, we've kept the rhythm the exact same both those times around. So you could either change the rhythm, you could change the notes, it's sort of up to you. You just have to, through trial and error, just find what works. The main thing that you've got to do is make sure that it's working with the music that's behind it, so these chords and the bass. They've all got to be working in tandem. And then similar to the rest of the song, we have this little timbale fill. And then we just introduce all of our drums. This time we're just adding this little ride at the top. So that just helps to bring those highs of the drums through a little bit more when the drop comes in. And again, like I said earlier about Calvin Harris's sort of genius in terms of using his instruments as rhythmic elements. When you hear this drop, you can hear these plucks especially. They're creating a rhythm that I would normally try to create with a hi-hat. So if you listen to the rhythm, it's using that, and actually, because drums are the most percussive element of a track, I personally would think, well, let's use drums to create that rhythm. But actually, you can be so much more clever in terms of the structure of your songs and creating the rhythms where you wouldn't necessarily expect them. So in this instance, it's the bass and the chords are the places where you find actually the most rhythm. And again, it helps when you have a groove on your musical elements as well. So that really helps with the groove, but also just choosing the right places for your chords to sit, and also having a sort of counteracting rhythm in your bass as well is going to be the thing that really creates a lot of movement in the track. And there we have it. I do hope this has helped. Thank you very much for watching. Calvin Harris was probably my first producer crush. Not crush, but you know what I mean? Like, he was my first idol. And it's taken me too long to make a Calvin Harris song. So I'm glad we have finally arrived. Thank you very much for watching, and I do hope it's helped. Love to your mothers.